Some countries won't draft you into the military unless you've got a brother. In parts of Ghana, the second-born twin is considered the elder. And if you're mixed race, the odds of finding a matching bone marrow donor, even in your own family, can be surprisingly low. From ancient beliefs to modern genetics, by the end of this video, you'll see just how strange, powerful, and utterly unfair the world of siblings can be. I'm Mike with List 25, and these are 25 facts about siblings. In Egypt, having a brother can literally land you in the army. Yep, how's that for gender equality? Males are required to serve once they hit 18, but if you're an only child, or the only boy in a family of sisters, you are automatically exempt. The moment a brother shows up, though, you're suddenly eligible. You're not officially more expendable. Egypt's not saying that out loud, but the logic is that your family line won't disappear if something happens to you. If you had a brother in Egypt and spent your youth losing remote control battles, congrats. You also lost your only child draft exemption. In most parts of the world, being born first when you're part of twins means that you're the oldest. Simple, right? Well, not if you're from Ghana. There, one tribe believes that the second twin to come out is actually the oldest, and the reason is almost poetic. According to them, the second baby stayed behind to help push the first. So instead of being late or second, they're seen as the responsible ones. The calm, collected older sibling who made sure their twin got out before making their own exit. It's a total reversal of everything twins deem holy. Twin number 2 gets all the bragging rights. Have you ever heard of savior siblings? If you haven't, that's what they call a child who gets conceived specifically to donate life-saving tissue, like bone marrow, to an older brother or sister. It usually happens when the older child has a deadly or incurable disease and no donor match can be found. So the parents go through IVF, choose an embryo that's a perfect genetic match, and hope that the baby can make a difference. Sometimes all that's needed is a bit of cord blood collected at birth. Other times, the younger sibling has to go through a few medical procedures later on. It's intense and obviously brings up a few ethical questions, but for some families, it's the only hope they've got. Okay, what I'm about to say might start an argument or two, but according to a 2017 study, some children are closer to their pets than their siblings. And not just in a I love my cat kind of way. They've actually gone so far as to say that some children love their pets more, especially if that pet happens to be a dog. Now, I might be impartial here, but pets don't interrupt you, they don't steal your stuff, and they definitely don't rat you out to your parents. So yeah, kind of makes sense. Plus, dogs are basically emotional support animals that come neatly wrapped with zero judgment. Siblings, on the other hand? Well, need I say more? That's not to say that sibling bond doesn't matter. But when it comes to comfort, loyalty, and someone you actually want to hang out with, well, the dog usually wins. China's one-child policy officially ended in 2016 when they moved to a 2-child cap. In the meantime, that's been up to 3. But as you can imagine, a whole generation of people grew up with no siblings at all. In fact, for a lot of kids, the whole idea of having a sibling wasn't even something they can imagine. Also, just to make things extra confusing, in Mandarin, people often use the words brother or sister when talking about cousins. So, even if someone talked about their sister, there was no guarantee that they were talking about an actual sibling. Basically, if you grew up under that policy, the whole sibling idea felt imaginary, like something from a sitcom and nothing else. Now, if you feel like your childhood consisted of nothing but shouting matches, slammed doors, and you getting blamed for everything, you're probably right. A 1999 study led by developmental psychologist Dr. Lori Kramer found that siblings between the ages of 3 and 7 got into almost 3.5 fights every hour. That's one argument about every 17 minutes. And just in case you were wondering, yes, they physically timed it. Most of the conflict was verbal, teasing, whining, the usual. But the odd bit of pushing and grabbing happened too. There were even more arguments when it came to kids between the ages of 2 and 4, with fights breaking out as often as 6 times every hour. I think that means that if you made it through childhood without a black eye or a bruised ego, well, you were doing much better than most. Moving on. Scientists also recently discovered that we have the ability to sniff out our siblings, so to speak. In one study, children were asked to identify people by scent using dirty t-shirts. They discovered that pre-adolescent children, in particular, were surprisingly good at recognizing the smell of a full sibling. They couldn't do the same with half or step siblings, which does suggest that it's tied to genetics, not just familiarity. The same thing happened with the mothers. It was easy for them to identify their own or biological children, but difficult when they were not genetically related. So, while you might not notice your sibling scent in daily life, your nose apparently does. Whether you like it or not, you are biologically wired to know exactly what your brother or sister smells like. There's also been a study from Ohio State University that found that the more siblings you have, the less likely you are to get divorced. Each additional sibling, up to 7, lowers your chances by about 2%. Researchers think it comes down to social skills. If you go through life with siblings by your side, it forces you to navigate arguments, compromise, and survive group politics. Basically, it's relationship boot camp. So if you have 1 sibling, that's a 2% drop. 2 siblings? I'll make that 4. Got 4? Now you're looking at 8%. 5 siblings? That is 10% off your divorce risk. Not only did your siblings toughen you up emotionally, apparently they've also given you the tools you need to have a long and successful marriage. On a totally different note, did you know there's such thing as a 3/4 sibling? It's when children have the same dad and their moms just happen to be sisters. Or the other way around. They have the same mother and their dads are brothers. That makes them more closely related than half siblings, but not quite full siblings. Genetically, they share about 37.5% of their DNA, which sits right between the 50% for full siblings and 25% for half. That's where the name comes from. It's 3/4 of a full sibling, give or take. Which brings us right back to equality and the other Mozart prodigy. Yes, Mozart had a sister. Maria Anna Mozart, nicknamed Nano, played the piano, toured with Wolfgang, and was praised for her musical ability and style. Some even thought she was the more disciplined performer of the two. But once she hit her late teens, the performances stopped. Her father pulled her from the spotlight and shifted all attention to Wolfgang. She wasn't allowed to tour anymore, and she ended up stuck at home while her brother became a legend. Nevertheless, she continued to compose privately, and at least one of her pieces was praised by Wolfgang himself. The majority of her work, however, was never published, and almost all of it has been lost. Meanwhile, over in the Brotherhood Hall of Fame, we have a very unique Guinness World Record. Between 2006 and 2007, identical twin brothers ran Poland. Lech Kaczynski was president, and his twin, Yaroslav, was prime minister. It was the first time in recorded history that 2 siblings held both top offices in the same country at the same time. Lech was elected first in 2005. Then, less than a year later, Yaroslav stepped in as prime minister. The twin takeover didn't last long. Yaroslav lost his seat in 2007, but for a brief window, the country was basically run by a shared DNA strand. Speaking of twin things, South Africa's most infamous marathon cheat happened in 1999 when brothers Sergio and Arnold Mitswaneng swapped places mid-race during the Comrades Marathon. Every 45 minutes or so, one ducked into a portable toilet and came out in the other's shoes. The plan worked, until their watches gave them away. Photos caught them wearing them on opposite wrists, and a sharp-eyed reporter noticed Sergio's leg scar disappearing and reappearing. They crossed the finish line in 9th place and walked away with 6,000 Rand in prize money, which was around $330. But officials disqualified them, stripped the result, and banned them for 5 years. The worst part is that someone believed this wasn't a one-off. They might have pulled something similar the year before at another marathon. It's also fun to note that the Wright Brothers, the famous flying duo, were afraid of flying together. Not because they doubted their invention, but because they didn't want to risk both of them dying in the same crash. If something went wrong, at least one of them needed to survive to keep the whole aviation project alive. So in the early days, they took turns. One would pilot the flight, and the other stayed safely on the ground, watching, recording, and probably holding his breath, I guess. It wasn't until much later, once they were more confident, that they actually started flying together. Until then, it was a very cautious case of, you go, I'll watch. Alright, our next entry is a combination of folklore and documented history, but it definitely deserves a spot on this list. Some siblings are closer than others. None more so than the woman who showed up late to a funeral and accidentally saved her sister's life. Essie Dunbar was born in South Carolina in 1885, and it's been confirmed that she died in 1962 at the age of 77. That part's documented. The rest? Well, it's been retold in local papers since the 50s, and it goes like this. In 1915, Essie had an epileptic seizure, was declared dead, and buried. Her sister, arriving late, begged to see her one last time. The grave was reopened, and Essie allegedly sat up and smiled. Now, no official records from 1915 can confirm the event. However, many people believe that Essie outlived her own funeral by 47 years thanks to her sister's desire to say goodbye. Then again, it's safe to say that not every sibling reunion ends that sweetly. In some cases, siblings who are separated at birth meet as adults and end up feeling a really strong attraction to each other. And yeah, I'm talking about that kind of attraction. It's called genetic sexual attraction, and has been reported enough times that psychologists have looked into it. The theory is that if you grow up around a sibling, your brain kind of builds a barrier. You are not wired to see them that way. But if you never met as kids, that filter never kicks in. So when long-lost siblings finally connect, those familiar traits and features can lead to something very confusing. Let's head to safer ground. Did you know no US president has ever been an only child? Each one of them, from George Washington to Joe Biden, had at least one sibling. That's 45 presidents, and not one exception. No one's completely sure why, but some historians think having siblings may give future leaders an edge. You grow up learning how to share attention, hold your ground, and deal with competing personalities. Skills that definitely don't hurt to have in politics. Meaning, if you've ever fought over chores or survived a road trip squished between your siblings in the back seat, well, you're technically presidential material. Switching continents and crowns, family ties can get political in more ways than one. When Prince Phillip married Princess Elizabeth in 1947, his own sisters weren't invited to the wedding. Not because of a family feud, but because they all had married German noblemen. And that was a problem. The war had only ended 2 years earlier, and Britain was still picking up the pieces. Inviting anyone tied to the German aristocracy, even if they were family, would have caused a full-on public meltdown. So Philip was told they couldn't come. Not ideal, but the royal family wasn't taking any chances. Anyway, let's return to China. Their one-child policy not only made siblings something that nobody could imagine, it also had a surprising side effect. Twins. After the policy kicked in, reports of twin births almost doubled. It didn't cause any genetic changes or anything like that. Parents just had to get creative. Some turned to fertility treatments, which are more likely to result in twins. Others just bent the truth. In some cases, 2 children born close together were claimed as twins on paper to sneak past the one-child rule. Because if twins show up naturally, the government couldn't exactly pick one for you to keep. Of course, being a twin can also be a very messy affair. A few years ago, a 22-year-old woman in Argentina named Edith Casas decided to marry the man of her dreams. The problem? That man, Victor Chingolani, had been convicted of murdering her twin sister, Joanna, 2 years earlier. As you can imagine, her parents were horrified. The courts actually delayed the wedding to have Edith undergo a mental health evaluation. But she passed. And on Valentine's Day 2013, while Victor was still serving the 13-year sentence, well, she married him anyway. The next spot on today's list was reserved for something less dramatic, but still unfair if you're the youngest. A large British study in 2011 found that in families with 4 children or more, the younger siblings tended to be shorter, by about an inch on average, and the youngest actually got hit the hardest. They think it might be due to everything from prenatal factors to good old-fashioned parental exhaustion. Apparently by kid number 4, things like nutrition, sleep schedules, and doctor visits might not get quite the same level of attention. It's not a massive difference in the greater scheme of things, but when your older siblings are already looking down on you figuratively, well, being short doesn't help. Mozart's sister isn't the only sibling in history whose story deserves a wider audience. Most people know who Anne Frank was, and that she kept a diary, but fewer realize that she had an older sister, Margot, and that Margot kept one too. Margot was quieter, more reserved, but just as thoughtful. According to Anne's own writing, her sister had started a diary before the family went into hiding, but no trace has ever been found. No surviving pages, no excerpts, nothing preserved. We only know it existed because Anne mentioned it in her own entries. It's one of those lost pieces of history that makes you wonder what we missed, what her voice could have added, and how her vision of events might have reshaped what we understand now. On the other side of siblings that vanish from the record, you also get those who leave traces in ways you wouldn't expect. A 30-year study published in the American Journal of Psychiatry found that children who had troubled relationships with their siblings were more likely to struggle with depression and drug use later in life as adults. And this wasn't just true for people from difficult homes. Even when researchers factored in things like parenting style, birth order, or how many kids were in the family, the sibling relationship still stood out. The biggest predictor? How toxic or strained the sibling relationship was early on. Constant conflict, emotional neglect, or favoritism between siblings seemed to leave a deeper psychological mark than almost anything else at home. So while siblings can be a source of support, they can also become one of the earliest sources of emotional damage, and it can last a lifetime. However, it must be said that not all sibling influence is negative. Some of it can be way cuter. Scientists have found that 1-year-olds with older siblings mimic about 50% of their siblings' behaviors. Whether it's copying how they play with toys, how they react to the parents, or what they do with the Xbox, or even how they throw a tantrum, the little ones are watching everything. Older siblings basically become tiny role models, whether they want the job or not. And since babies tend to look up to them way before they fully understand what's going on, the influence kicks in early. If your toddler suddenly developed some suspicious familiar habits out of nowhere, well, there's a good chance they didn't come up with it on their own. You should also know that there's a surprising health benefit to having siblings. Apparently, they might help keep your weight in check. One study found that for every additional sibling in the household, the risk of obesity dropped by 14%, especially among girls. They're still trying to figure out why exactly, but one theory is that siblings keep each other more physically attractive. More play, more movement, more chasing each other to get a hold of the remote equals less sitting still. And with more kids in the mix, there's also less room for overindulging, both in food and screen time. Basically, growing up with siblings might be the original version of group fitness. Just with more yelling and fewer water bottles. And finally, we're ending with a medical reality most people don't know about. For patients who need a bone marrow or stem cell transplant, the best matches come from donors with similar human leukocyte antigen, or HLA markers. These are inherited, which is why siblings are often tested first. But even between full siblings, there is only about a 25% chance of being a match. And if you're mixed race, well, the odds are even lower. Because their HLA profiles are drawn from multiple ancestral backgrounds, they are far less likely to match with anyone on donor registries. Most of these registries are still overwhelmingly white. In the United States, white patients have about a 77% chance of finding a match. For black patients, it drops to 23%. For multiracial patients, it's often below 20%. Some families search international registries. Others never find a match at all. So, if you have never considered becoming a donor, especially if you're mixed race, it is worth thinking about. It could really be the difference between life and death for someone out there. And that's a wrap. 25 sibling facts. And we didn't even get into who your mom loves the most. But before you head off, here's your quiz question for the day. Which of these could result in 3/4 siblings? A, 2 kids with the same father and unrelated mothers. B, 2 kids with different parents who are family friends. C, two kids whose moms are sisters and share the same father, or D, identical twins raised in separate households? Let me know your answers in the comments below. And if you're still in the mood for family weirdness, check out our related video, 25 Weird Facts About Twins. Seeing double has never been stranger, or more entertaining. As always, thank you guys so much for watching. Hit like, tap subscribe, ring the bell, and I'll see you again next time. Shout out to my siblings. Half siblings. I don't have any full siblings, as far as I know.